Hi everybody, Joe Fleenor here with Above the Fold, and I am so excited to announce our brand new Above the Fold headliners. This is going to be a series of interviews and discussions we're going to be sharing with each of you with the most influential people in the triathlon industry. We welcome you to take part and check it out. Thank you. On this episode of Above the Fold Headliners, we had the privilege of speaking with Rocky Harris, USA Triathlon's CEO. We spoke on a variety of topics, including the COVID-19 pandemic and how it's affecting USA Triathlon and other national governing bodies, as well as when and how we're going to be returning to racing and what that will look like. Rocky also talks about his vision for repositioning the brand of triathlon. And make sure you hang around to the very end, because Rocky gives some great motivational advice for everybody as we're dealing with this crisis. Check it out, and thanks for tuning in. All right, welcome everybody. This is Joe Fleenor with Above the Fold Events and Sport Promotions. Welcome to the second of our brand new series called Above the Fold Headliners. And I am super excited about today's guest. Many of you probably recognize the face. You definitely recognize maybe the gear that he's wearing. But USA Triathlon CEO, Rocky Harris is joining me. Rocky, thank you so much for being a part of this.
Thanks, Joe. Yeah, happy to be here. Thank you.
Cool. So obviously this is, there's no sugarcoating it. This is an interesting time that we're all in the sport, and everybody's kind of dealing with this. So it's not necessarily unique for the world of triathlon, but obviously our conversation will steer towards the direction of where we are currently and kind of how we're going to bounce out of that. But before we get into that, I would love to, you're 3 years in now. Is that about right?
Yeah, just over 3 years. So.
Yeah, and I just got into race directing about 5 years ago. So my experience with your predecessor, USAT, has been not real vast, but I have noticed in the 5 years just the differences between the last three versus the prior two. It was almost this mindset of negativity. And now I feel like it's very much more positive, kind of a positive outlook on things. But your background, I sort of knew it until I started reading about it kind of in preparation for this. And I didn't realize you've got a lot of cool experiences. I'll just list them out real quick. And I'd love for you to talk about how these experiences positioned you for where you are now successfully. But prior to this, you were with Arizona State University. You were their chief operating officer, among other things.
Go Devils.
I'm sorry? Oh, yeah, good. My cousin, huge Arizona State grad, lives in Dallas and is a season ticket holder still. He travels back and forth.
Oh, yeah.
So, yeah, very familiar with the Devil pride. Major League Soccer, before that, you were with the Houston Dynamo as their chief marketing officer. Reliant Energy, a Fortune 500 company, I believe, prior to that, as their director of sport and marketing sponsorships, I believe is the title. And then you were with the NFL before that in a couple of capacities in kind of the communications, media relations world, and obviously some other stuff before that. That's a pretty good credential. Talk a little bit about that and how that's positioned you well for your new role as CEO of USAT.
Yeah, so I think, my dad was a high school football and track coach. So I always grew up around sport. My mom was a professor. And so I always loved sport in school. And so, as I wanted to be a coach like my dad, and my dad gave me really good advice early on that the business side of sports going to grow significantly over the next 20 years. So you should move into that. It's actually, you're better equipped for that. He obviously saw I wasn't a talented coach, so he did that. And so what I did through my career is I was always just trying to gain experiences and learn. That's just my philosophy on life. And so when I was in the NFL, I really enjoyed it. I worked for the 49ers and the Texans. I grew a lot, learned a lot there. But what I found about the NFL, it was a very stagnant culture overall. Because it was so established, it was at the top. It was something that they didn't feel at the time. It wasn't about new ideas. It was about status quo and maintaining. And that's just not who I am. I'm very much a driver of change, and I enjoy when everyone's willing to innovate. And so that's why I was willing to take the jump to corporate America, because I really wanted to learn about the business more, not just PR, not just marketing, but how does the full business work? And why do companies make decisions to invest in sport? what makes them, why do they see value in that? So I did oversee, it was a Fortune 200 company at the time, and I had a huge budget. I mean, we had the naming rights at Reliance Stadium. We had like 25 different properties. So I really learned about how do you analyze the value in sport properties? Then I really missed sport. I'm working in corporate America with all these stuffy suits. I learned a lot, but it was boring. It wasn't as exciting. I'm a competitive person. I just am. I like to be the best at everything or be associated with. And so while you didn't have that scorecard every week, right? You can measure yourself against. So when I joined the AEG, which is a huge global company, they started the team in Houston, Major League Soccer, along with AEG did, called the Houston Dynamo, and they needed someone to come in and help run their business, mostly the external side of the business, and help them get a stadium built. So I learned about politics and government relations, and still managing a team and managing international sport. It wasn't as popular here as it was in other places,
right?
But it was on a fast growth mode. It's like the opposite of the NFL. It was like innovate every day, throw a new idea out there. So it really taught me to be a risk taker and not be afraid to fail. And I think that was really helpful, because when I moved to college athletics, it was all about constituent management. Like, I didn't know what I was doing. Like, I was used to just going to my boss and flying. Like, okay, I got an idea, boom, let's go. Well, in college athletics, you have alumni, donors, all these, and the university. So you have to check with all these constituents, get their buy-in, get feedback before you make big decisions. So I felt like that was probably the best. And I was there for 5 or 6 years, but that was one of my favorite takeaways, and the thing that I think applied to this job that I'm in now most. And the reason why people thought I was a little crazy to leave ASU, actually, I grew up in Tempe, Arizona. Yeah. My parents both went to ASU. My wife's my sister-in-law went to ASU. All my friends were there. Like, and I had literally I was the number 2 person in the athletic department that I was an alumni of, right? And I'd been done doing the job so long, I actually started getting my PhD because I wanted to activate my brain more and do more. So I really knew the job, and I felt like I was in the perfect job, and there was no reason, no one ever thought I was going to leave. They literally thought I was going to be in that job forever. I really shocked people when I decided to take the plunge to USA Triathlon and take that jump, because what I saw as an athlete is the sport was going in the wrong direction. I felt like it lost the community feel that I felt when I joined the sport, when I started participating. It felt like people became very selfish and separated, and everybody we weren't a community anymore. We were just a bunch of different businesses with athletes. Yeah. And I felt it. I saw it happen over time, but I really started paying attention when we added NCAA triathlon at ASU when I was there, women's triathlon. And so I started paying a little closer attention. And I felt like when I saw the USA Triathlon CEO position and talked to the board about that, I was at the time thinking, how can I help them find the right leader? Mm-hmm. And as I thought about it, I said, well, what they really need is somebody who cares again about the sport, who understands that it's not about USA Triathlon monetizing the sport and competing with the community, but instead lifting the community up and helping them be successful, because if they're successful, we'll be successful. Yeah. So I kind of took each of the pieces from my career, from PR marketing early on to learning about valuations of sport business, to learning about how to operate in an innovative culture in a sport like soccer, to constituent management at ASU. It all set me up really to feel like this job was right for me to move my family away from my parents, away from my sister, away from my wife's sister, away from all my friends, my community, to Colorado Springs. And by the way, I moved here in 2 weeks, pulled everyone out of school, and because I'm ripped the Band-Aid off, let's do this, right? Did
you have all 3 kids at the time?
I did, yeah. And so they're all young. Right now I have they're all girls, 9, 6, and 4. Okay. So yeah, it was 3 years ago, so they're much younger. But and so and the reason why it became for me, the same reason why I went to ASU. I felt like it was going in the wrong direction at the time. How I can tell this is when you go into an organization and they're not proud to work there. Yeah. When you see it, and I saw that at both, and USA Triathlon was proud to work there. They weren't proud of the work they were doing. Yeah. And so all I had to do is take this really talented staff who cared. They always wanted to work for the people and we just flipped it and said, look, this is no longer about USA Triathlon. It's about the sport. It's bigger than us. Yeah. And they immediately shifted in the way we operated to make it more focused on the people and not so much on how we can drive business
That's great. Has that been, have you felt like that's been a pretty quick switch with them, or is that kind of like steering a boat and it's just a slow process to kind of get them out of what they're used to versus what they really want to be?
No, our staff, when I got there, I would say was more open to change than any group of people I've ever been around.
Cool.
They knew it was necessary. I mean, if you think about this, you're at a job and the sport is either declining or being flat for 5 or 6 years. You're kicking butt at your job. You're doing great things, but the results aren't showing up. So I think the staff was at the point where they were overworked, they were exhausted, and they weren't seeing the results. So they were totally open to this crazy guy coming in who had no national governing body experience. I'm just a triathlete who I ended up, having experience adding the sport at ASU. But they were so open-minded about everything, so willing to take some of my vision and apply it. And I think that's where our constituents, when you build trust with people, it takes time. You have to say things and then deliver on what you say. So, like it's natural for maybe my first 6 months, I'm going to go, well, he's talking a big game, but is he going to start delivering on these things? Yeah. And I felt like we built trust when we started delivering on the things we said, and we remained consistent with that. Yeah. And so that's really where I think the staff is like, we have turned over more than 50% of the staff though, since I've been there, because some people aren't equipped to be in the type of culture that I create, because I'm very supportive, very flexible, but expectations are high. Like I want to be the best at everything, and I expect that out of my staff. And now I feel like we have a staff of people who are the best at what they do at their jobs. Great. And if you've noticed, if you talk to our staff, which is, I know you have, they're more service focused now. Yeah. And the thing that bothers me most is when you ask somebody something and the first response is why you can't do something. So now we have more can people than can't. And if we can't, we have to explain why. The why behind the can't is more important than saying no. Because there are lots of times you can't do things, right? We can't do everything for everybody. Right. But it's that explanation. I feel like I've surrounded myself with a team that's really good at that. And I also got people, which I felt like was important, who have done the jobs that our community do. So my chief of staff, she was a race director. She was a race director of New York City Triathlon, right? That's important to me, to bring people in that actually know the jobs. I brought coaches in who are actual certified coaches coming in to work in our coaching education area, because I felt like it was important for us to know what people are dealing with on the ground. So we're not just this entity in Colorado Springs, acting like God over this sport. That's just not our role. Yeah.
So looking these last 3 years, obviously we've hit a roadblock a little bit, but what are some of the biggest accomplishments outside of creating a new culture within the organization, but just data points? Are key data points that you're most proud of over these last 3 years?
Yeah, I think the last year was one of those turnaround years that you have in a business that, I told my staff that will go down in their careers as something that they'll never forget, because we went from 5 years of declines, like sometimes double-digit declines, from clubs to everything, athletes, members, to last year we turned every single number around. Every single one was trending in a positive direction, double-digit growth across the board. And so I'm very proud of that. But that wasn't us. I think that was us getting out of the way and allowing the people who do their job best to do it even better. And those are the people on the ground. So that's one of the things I'm most proud of. I'm really proud of what we've done with our high performance program too. I feel like we have, our athletes are so easy to work with. They're focused and dedicated. I think our collaboration with others like, Ironman and USA Swimming, and that we're too small. I mean, as a sport still, my vision for the sport is to make it a sport that you watch on TV that becomes more spectator sport than a participant sport. That's going to take years. But I believe we started setting ourselves up for that and heading in that direction. Yeah. There's so many things that I'm proud of, but I think the biggest thing is, if you've been working with us for 5 to 10 years, if you felt a difference, if you see a difference, that to me is the most rewarding piece. Yeah. It's what you started this off with, right? Is you noticed it. You can't maybe not like put your finger on exactly what it is, but you know there's a difference. Yeah. And I felt like that's where for me as being an athlete and a USA Triathlon member for a long time, I felt like that went away. Yeah. Right. And I felt like we're getting that back. And I told my staff this in February, like, look, we were facing headwind for a long time. Right. Now we have the wind at our back, and it's what do we do with that? And then COVID-19 happened a month later. But I will say this, if we hadn't had the year we had last year, this would be much tougher. Because what that shows us is our sport wasn't this like declining thing. It was coming back in a big way. So when when we move past this and there's a vaccine in the future, near future, hopefully, we're going to be right back, right? It's going to take a little bit of time. There's going to be some growing pains, but the sport's not going anywhere. And I want to make sure your audience, I know you know that, but this isn't like it's devastating to small business owners. It's devastating to us. But our sport is going to survive and be stronger on the back end. It's just going to take us time to get there.
Yeah. And it's interesting. I was just looking, I think I got an email from the Endurance Sports Wire or something that comes through every week or so. And today it came out and I noticed, and I was going to bring this up. I'm glad it came out today because it kind of ties in with what we're talking about. But it was about the NGBs and how they're dealing with this. And so many of them are struggling, like they're really impacted. And, for instance, there's many layoffs with a lot of these. Track and field cut 8, cycling cut 8. USA Rugby is kind of teetering on the verge of bankruptcy, and all these people are having issues with, membership, and their revenues are generated by events and things like that. So how is it affecting you guys from an NGB standpoint? Is it really catastrophic for you, or is it kind of too early to know yet?
It's catastrophic, but not so much. We were lucky that we've historically, my predecessor, everyone's managed the business very well. So we do have reserves that we're able to tap into, but it's devastating, millions of dollars in losses. And when I came here a few years ago, my goal was to diversify our organization, our revenue streams, so we weren't so reliant on events. We started doing that with more non-endemic corporate partners like Toyota, more philanthropic donations through our foundation. But we were still a few years away from being diversified enough to be able to survive something like this and be able to manage it easily. But my philosophy I don't know what the future holds, like even a month from now. But I do prioritize people first. So my first inclination is not to cut staff. I think that's actually although at some point, you got to do that if your business you have to. And that's some of those other organizations. I'm not faulting them. They just have different approaches and different priorities. So if we can make sure that we don't negatively impact our staff as much as possible, negatively impact our athletes as much as possible, and negatively impact our community like race directors and clubs. So those are areas that, in this first phase of cuts, we've made significant cuts already. I didn't want to cut those 3 areas. So our support for race directors and clubs and coaches not being cut, our support for athletes not being cut, my staff not being cut. I'm willing to put things on the shelf for the time being, programs, some different things that we can wait on and not invest in at this point. So that's really for me what's most challenging is, while my philosophy is to put people first, everyone has their own philosophies, and I can't fault them for the way that they're approaching their businesses, because they have to make those really tough decisions. Yeah. So that's been my approach. We have been extremely flexible with our staff. So while, we have been working remotely, like probably everyone, for 6-7 weeks, one of my employees has 3 kids at home and her husband works. So she asked for voluntary time to be able to do this. So we've had people that have come to us, and we're being very flexible with them. But this is tough times. It's not, and I feel, I'm not sitting here whining and saying like, woe is me. It's just a reality. And I think that, our membership has totally stopped. No one's renewing memberships, purchasing memberships. It's really challenging. And I think this is really where, going back to our original question, or I think it was maybe your second question about, one of the things that triggered me coming here was that I got injured in 2014. I was training for Ironman Arizona and had a grade 5 clavicle separation. I crashed on my bike. And a month or 2 later, my USA Triathlon membership was up, and I just renewed it. I knew I was going to race for a year, but I just renewed it.
Right.
And I remember at that point I thought about it. I said, why am I renewing this? Oh, because I care about the sport. I want to support the sport. I didn't really think about racing attached to it. But so many people do, right? And so where I want to build the brand for our sport and for us at USA Triathlon is that you just are a part of our club. You're a part of our team through good times and bad, whether you're racing or not. And by renewing your membership, you're supporting the sport. We're not there yet, Joe, but that's my vision is that our community believes in us, that we're going to do the right thing for the sport. So they make that $4 a month investment in us, knowing that we're going to do right by them.
Yeah. And I guess right now, the vast majority of athletes pay their membership fee because they just need the insurance or they need to race, and it's a requirement to race. So they're not thinking about it in terms of what you just mentioned, which is for the love of the sport and being on Team USA Triathlon. So
exactly. And I think we're going to get there, Joe. I really do, because I saw the turn in people's when I got here, the first 6 months, I got thousands of complaint emails about everything we're doing wrong. Now when people give me feedback, and I got thick skin. Like I'm used to my name, not as much anymore, but used to be in the newspaper criticizing me for how I'm, building a stadium or doing this. So I'm fine with it. Now they're giving constructive feedback, and they're actually giving us the benefit of the doubt on the front end. Hey, I saw this, like totally threw me off. This is my first thought about it. Tell me why you did it. Let me know, because I'm sure there's a good reason.
Right.
It's much different than when I got here and they're like, look at you idiots. What are you doing? So just even the tone, our community now, I think they're starting, or they have for a while. They know that our heart's in the right place and that we're not doing this I didn't come take this job to quite frankly, no offense, but to build USA Triathlon up. I did it to build the sport. Yeah. And I think when people understand that that's our mission, is to grow the sport, that changes their approach to us, right? Yeah. So over time, now again, this situation has not helped, but we are over the next few months here going to be rolling out a brand essence for the sport, brand repositioning about what the sport means and why we love this sport and why others should too. And really the focus is to tell the stories of individuals and how the sport's impacted them. And also to convey that our sport is more than just long distance triathlon, that it's for everybody. And so I think that building the brand of the sport will also build the brand of USA Triathlon.
Yeah. It also, what I've noticed during these last 6 weeks or so, since there's no racing, you're getting so many people coming, they're saying, we miss this social aspect of the sport. We miss coming together. We're all in it for the same thing, and we don't have that anymore. And I think there's this, to your point of the repositioning of the brand, it's an individual sport, but in reality, it's very social. And I think we need to reposition it that way where, there's more emphasis on, and I think there was something I read maybe when you were first hired, where you wanted to reposition the brand of the triathlon by focusing on more, let me see here, like community-oriented, short course racing, groups, things like that, which obviously local race directors eat that stuff up because we've been preaching that forever, and kind of getting away from the concept of triathlon as only long distance. And that's a big focus for me here in like the Tennessee, Kentucky markets. And I know a lot of the other race directors feel the same way. So that was something that I know you feel strongly about too, that you're trying to instill.
Yeah, and I think that it's critical if we want to grow, and where we're actually really fortunate that Ironman has been in our sport so long because they built the brand. And what it did though is it built their brand, and it built the brand for the disciplines that they sport 70.3 and long course. And there was no alternative voice out there to let people know that our sport is more than that there are indoor triathlons, pool triathlons, super sprints, all these different formats, duathlon, run, bike, run, as I say, all these. And so we need to take that back and show people that if you can, walk and ride a bike and swim across a pool, there's a triathlon for you out there. You can be a triathlete. Yeah. And that's part of our objective as the governing body, is to show that all the dimensions of the sport. The sport is not one dimensional. There's something different. I'm highly competitive. One of my best friends I train with is not at all. He could care less. He just shows up to the races, but he still loves the sport just as much.
Yeah. Well, let's shift gears a little bit to this COVID-19 pandemic that we're facing. And it's the elephant in the room that, I wish, we had more guidance that we could share with athletes. But being top dog at the governing body of the sport, and I know you're going to be kind of unveiling some recommendations to racers, to race directors, to everybody as we kind of re-enter the racing season. But when will racing return? And then when it does, what will that look like? I'd love your take on that.
Yeah, so I definitely cannot, I honestly don't know what next week's going to look like, right? So timeline would be, to me, not appropriate for me to come up with some fake number, right? Because I could just say, yeah, here it is. But, so what we're trying to do is provide flexibility and make things based on the local communities and the standards within the local communities. And I'll go through my philosophy and approach on this. So we are right now working on what I'm calling, USA Triathlon return to multi-sport guidelines. So guidelines for what races will look like and what training will look like as the country starts coming back, as states start coming back and returning back to their almost old way of doing things. And so what we're doing with the guidelines document is we're mimicking and matching what the federal guidelines that were released a few weeks ago. So that way we're not medical experts. We shouldn't say when a state should do what. Let's leave that up. And so we are following the 3 phases of the federal government. Many states aren't going to follow the federal government's 3 phases. So our guidelines will be flexible enough. So you in Tennessee, if your state is different than California in the way they come out, and they create their own guidelines, that you can work from our guidelines to work with your state to and your local authorities to have a plan, or at least guidelines for how you what phase you're in and what that means for triathlon. The second document below that would be recommendations for race directors. So return to racing recommendations for race directors. That won't be built by me or my team. We'll outline it. We're going to have the race director committee, medical experts, other race directors, other people in the endurance space help us create that document. So that would come out with, how do you produce a safe race considering physical distancing standards? How do you sanitize your race based off the CDC standards for sanitizing a workspace? And then the race directors would help us populate that with recommendations. And then from that, we would have, how do we communicate these recommendations to athletes so they're aware and they know what they're going to be in for when they go race. So things will change. Right? Things will be different, especially at first, and we want to make sure our athletes are prepared for that. The last thing that we're doing is something that's been a concern of mine is, since pools are closed, how do we make sure that athletes are prepared? Most of us can prepare on the bike and run, or I think everyone that I know can. It's a swim. So we are, our coaching team is putting together a 30-day plan, some of it being indoor workouts, some of it being when you get back into a pool, how to prepare for, swim portion of the race in a compressed amount of time. Yeah. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about, but that could change. I mean, the guidelines are going to be something that will continue to evolve. The recommendations will, as we learn more. But what I'm telling you today, we may look back and add 5 other things or say we don't need to do that because things are just going to change. And I know that's what I've been most impressed with the triathlon community is, they understand that this is dynamic and that they've been really, I think what I found is that they've really allowed us to not have to have all the answers immediately. Yeah. And what they've been thankful for, and I've heard this, is other national governing bodies and other groups have put definitive answers down of like, we're going to stop racing till now, or we're going to do this. And people are saying, wait a second here. How do you know that? What medical expert said you should do that across the country for the next 90 days? And until we have medical experts or data informing us to do X, we're not going to do X. And I've been explaining that to people, and they understand that they'd rather us say what we know for the most part is going to happen than just keep guessing. Like many others are just guessing. And I think that's causing more confusion and chaos. What I find through this is there's so much uncertainty that to put more uncertainty out there by just saying things we think actually causes more problems. So when we say things, we actually feel like we're pretty confident in saying them. And that's been really well received by our community.
Are you concerned at all or frustrated that this is an election year and that the political element of all this is just going to further delay or speed up in some aspects kind of what we're doing here, and there's no clear-cut definitive way of doing something nationwide?
Yeah, I think that the lack of I'd say alignment, usually when you have crisis at this, I mean, anything close to this level, the country comes together. It hasn't this time, and for lots of reasons for it. Election year is one of them, but I think that we can also take advantage of that too, right? I know that that's like, the way that I look at it is like every problem there's a solution for. So how do we take control of our sport with what we know and not allow all those political factors to get in the way of moving our sport forward? If you think about this, like, this shows you how politics plays in, and people who have influence and power sometimes win, which is unfortunate. Someone coming from me, like a lower middle class kid that grew up in an inner city area. I usually don't like that at all and support that. But you're seeing that, like, look at how the heck are gyms opening? I mean, like, I'm happy I'm going swimming, but there's not a dirtier place. Like, and there's not a place, like, you can't, like, I'm on a treadmill. There's no way. I mean, you can't physical distance. You can't sanitize it. So somehow they got in that first wave, right? And so that shows you too, there's political influence in every element of this. And what I prefer to do is stay out of the politics and figure out, okay, take all the information from the experts and let's figure out what's best for our sport, and let's make that our policy and our guidelines. And then as new information comes in, we're apolitical. So we'll take this from this state Republican leader. We'll take this for who, I don't care. Yeah. Right. I just want the best and most factual information and be able to give our athletes and our race directors and our community guidance on what they should be doing.
Yeah. Okay, great. So with regards to that safe return to multi-sport plan that you were referring to, I shared with you when I kind of sent you some notes of what this discussion was going to be. There was an article about a medical task force that was being created, and it didn't say anything about USA Triathlon as being involved with that. It did mention ITU and some others, but is that something you're familiar with, or kind of, and if you are, talk to us a little bit about what that process is going to look like.
Yeah, so I don't want to complicate things. You get really complicated when you talk about like international governance, but there are international federations. So I'll give this like quick. So those are the IFs that are like 170 triathlon organizations like ours from countries across the world were kind of, they roll up to, right? So that's one piece of the sport. The other piece is every country has national governing organizations. For us, it's the United States Olympic and Paralympic Committee. So all 55, I think, NGBs of every report up align with the USOPC. So we kind of have two different groups that we work with. The international federations through the IOC are creating a task force to really look at this from the international level. So are groups, domestic groups like the USOPC is doing this as well. So we have medical, we have a medical task force that we work with. So we're going to use them to make sure every piece of information that we put out is the most up-to-date and factual medical information. But we want the race directors to really build out the plan, and then the medical team to review it and to put a stamp of approval on it. So they won't be the first stop. They'll be a part of the feedback team. And I think that right now, more than ever, the medical community, health experts are more important to our sport than ever. So we're going to lean on them heavily really for the foreseeable future. We have our own group of experts that we're leaning on, but I'm also become very close over the last month or two. I actually serve on the USOPC's COVID-19 task force. Or working group, or whatever the fun name is for it. We meet every single morning. We have a Zoom call, or a call like this. And the chief medical officer there he's also going to be a part of the review process for us. That way we have that kind of international coverage as well as the domestic coverage. Okay. So I'm confident that what we produce, while we can't provide medical advice, it'll have the most up-to-date, medical experts reviewing it, vetting it, and making sure that it's in a good place.
Cool. Okay. Well, let's wrap this up, and I'm going to give you one last kind of closing comment here. send our guest off with, words of wisdom, a little bit of motivation that keeps them kind of going through all this. If this is a washed out year, how do you keep those people that are kind of on the weekend warrior athletes that aren't, dedicated every single day to the sport? How do we keep them engaged and interested to stick with it and get us through this tough time?
Yeah, so I'm not concerned about the lifestyle athletes like me, right, who do this because I love it. I am concerned about newbies coming in. We brought a ton of new people into the sport the last 2 years. I'm concerned about that group. We're really going to focus on enhanced communication we have to that specific segment. We're also going to spend a lot of time, the bucket list athletes, I'm really concerned about them too, who only train to race, one race typically. I'm concerned about them. I will say this though, that to our community, like I have struggled through this, like really as an athlete, as a triathlete, I have ups and downs too, just like all of you. I'm still motivated to train because I want to be healthy and I want my lifestyle to be fit when racing comes back. But there are days where I really get down and I'm like, man, like, I was supposed to do Boston on Monday. I will say that when Monday came and went, I was down. I was really down. I went for a run that day. And I remember on the run, I got emotional. I really got emotional because, I love it. I love competing. I love racing. So what I would say is like, this can be a time to really soul search on why you love the sport and connect with that piece of it. And let's not make it just about the tangible outcomes. And that's really been like my transition for the last 6 or 7 weeks internally. Now I'm taking off my USA Triathlon CEO hat. This is just me as an athlete. And what I found the last few weeks is like, I'm actually enjoying training more now than ever. The pressure's off of me. I'm running with my dog now instead of trying to do my splits. I go out on my gravel bike instead of always trying to, see. So, I think let's get back to enjoying the aspects of training and know this, that we will do everything we can to make sure you're supported as athletes and our community is supported. And our sport will 100% be back stronger than ever. We're actually what I find through these times is challenging times brings you closer together and allows you to innovate and allows you to adapt and change. So what this is going to do for your sport as athletes is it will come out on the other side better than it is today. It doesn't feel like that now, but it will. Joe is going to innovate more than he has in his first 5 years. The next 5 years, he'll be more innovative. It's just going to happen. It's the way things work when there's crisis. And so just be confident to know that you're training for a reason, because not only for your health and wellness, but because racing will be back. And I just want you to be patient with the process because public safety and your safety is critically important. But for our sport, I think you're somewhat fortunate because we do rely on local authorities to make those decisions. So sport will come back in phases across the country. And I want you to be confident that we're going to do everything we can to work with those local authorities to make sure the races are safe for you.
Great. Rocky, thank you so much again for the time. This was really good. I really appreciate your time.
Absolutely. And I always do this. And actually, I just looked yesterday. I told my chief of staff there, I had 510 emails over the last 48 hours because it's been just a crazy week. But do email me if you have questions. It's rocky.harris@usatriathlon.org. I usually get back very quickly. It might be delayed now. It might be 2 or 3 days versus 2 or 3 hours. But just know that if you have ideas or comments, reach out to me because I do actually answer my own emails and respond.
That's why I originally reached out to you via Instagram because I was like, his email account has got to be blowing up. So I'm going to go kind of the back route.
Yeah, exactly. So, but thanks, Joe. I really appreciate what you're doing here. It's a lot of fun.
All right. Thanks, Rocky. Have a good one, man. I appreciate it.
Absolutely.
All right.